Have you ever felt that the silence you so desperately sought could suddenly become the most deafening noise in the world? For Alina, silence was a hard-won achievement, a treasure forged through sudden departures and late-night packing. She believed that in the small, damp Willow Creek, invisibility would be her shield. But life, with its cruel irony, has a peculiar way of returning us to the very eye of the storm, just when we think we've finally reached it. Perhaps this sounds familiar to you. That feeling that, no matter how fast you run, fate always runs a little faster. The night everything changed had no grand warnings. There was only the rhythmic, hypnotic sound of the torrential rain battering the zinc roof of the veterinary clinic. A curtain of gray water isolating Alina from the rest of civilization. She was about to turn off the last light, longing for the comfort of her small home on the edge of the forest, when the outside world decided to invade her refuge. The sound of the door slamming against the frame was like a shot in the dark. A man, whose features were lost beneath his soaked hood and the shadows of the night, entered carrying a heavy bundle wrapped in a military blanket. He didn't ask permission. He didn't inquire if she was still attending to patients. He simply placed the bundle on the stainless steel table and whispered words that chilled Alina's blood. "Save him, or we'll both be next." Before she could process the fear or confusion, the stranger retreated into the storm, leaving behind only a trail of mud and the metallic smell of fresh blood. On the table, a Belgian Malinois, breathless and with glazed eyes, fought against the inevitable. Alina acted on pure professional instinct, but when her trembling hands touched the animal's dense fur, she felt something no road accident could cause. As she cut the fur to clean the wound, the metallic crack of the projectile against the steel forceps echoed through the empty room. It wasn't a pack fight. It wasn't a hit and run. It was a gunshot wound, clean and executed with surgical precision. Stay with me until the end, because what Alina discovered in that moment was only the first layer of a conspiracy she could never have foreseen. As steam rose from the dog's warm body, and the clinic's light flickered due to the storm, the feeling of being watched became physical, like a cold touch on the back of her neck. Alina looked at the large glass front of the clinic and, for a second, saw only her own reflection, a woman fleeing from shadows, now holding an even larger shadow in her hands. But beyond the reflection, across the street, the headlights of a car with its lights off looked like two hungry eyes waiting for her to finish her work. She was just a veterinarian trying to start over, but there, in the middle of that early morning, she became the guardian of a secret that weighed more than the lead she had just extracted. What comes next may surprise you, because at the moment when Alina's vulnerability reached its peak, when she realized that the front door didn't have a strong enough lock to prevent what was to come, a figure emerged from the darkness of the parking lot. It wasn't one of the men from the mysterious car. It was Sheriff Silas. He was leaning against the side of his patrol car, the brim of his hat shielding his eyes from the rain, his right hand resting with a frightening ease on the leather holster at his hip. Silas didn't enter the clinic immediately. He simply positioned himself there, like a monolith of authority in silence, between Alina's door and the vehicle that was watching her. There was a tacit understanding in the air, a tension that vibrated at the same frequency as the distant thunder. Alina watched him through the fogged-up window, feeling her heart pound against her ribs. She didn't know if he was her savior, or just the man tasked with picking up the pieces of what would remain of her. The danger was no longer an abstract possibility. It had form, color, and was stationed just a few meters away. But somehow, Silas's massive presence created an invisible barrier, a line in the sand that no one dared to cross. The question that wouldn't leave Alina's mind, and that perhaps you're asking yourself now, is, why would a lawman, known for his coldness and distance, risk everything to be the shield for a woman he barely knew? Alina looked at the dog on the table, at the bullet in the stainless steel tub, and then at the man standing in the rain. She realized her life of peace and anonymity had ended the second she accepted that patient. She was immersed in something much bigger than Willow Creek, something involving betrayal and power. But as long as Silas stood there, motionless as an iron statue in the storm. She felt time had stopped, just to give her a chance to breathe. The problem was, in a world where men like Silas live, protection never comes without a price, and the danger the sheriff was trying to stop was only the beginning of a chase that wouldn't let up. She felt the next chapter of this night wouldn't be written with words, but with a courage she didn't yet know she possessed. The rain didn't let up, turning the asphalt into a black mirror, reflecting the intermittent light of the clinic's sign. Alina remained paralyzed before the operating table, her heart pounding frantically, seemingly competing with the beeping of the animal's heart monitor. She saw Silas's silhouette through the glass, raindrops trickling down his dark leather jacket, and wondered if he was real or a projection of her desperate desire for safety. The car across the street was still there, a predator lurking, but the sheriff's presence was like an anchor amidst the chaos. There was something in his posture, the rigidity of his shoulders, the way he ignored the cold to keep his eyes fixed on the threat that told Alina that, for the first time in years, she wouldn't have to carry the weight of the world alone. It's curious how we recognize ourselves in these stories of shelter and courage, isn't it? If you feel this channel is your safe place to experience these emotions, and if this kind of visceral loyalty moves you, know that Heart of Protection Stories exists precisely so that we can share this journey of protection and affection together. Being part of this community is what allows us to continue telling stories about these encounters that change destinies. Silas finally moved. He didn't head towards the suspicious car. Instead, he walked to the clinic door, the sound of his heavy boots echoing like a verdict on the ceramic floor. When he entered, the scent of ozone, rain, and pine filled the sterile environment, bringing with it a harsh reality. He tipped his hat, shaking off the water, and his eyes a deep gray like the sky before a storm met Elena's. He didn't ask if she was all right. He knew she wasn't. He simply walked to the metal table, observing the dog now, breathing with the aid of machines. "You did a good job, Elena," he said, his voice a low baritone that seemed to vibrate directly into her bones. "But what you took out of him put a target on your back that I can't erase with just a badge." Elena felt a shiver run down her spine. She pointed to the stainless steel tub where the bullet lay, deformed and sinister. "They're not going anywhere, are they?" she whispered, her voice almost fading from the immensity of what was happening. Silas took a step forward, closing the distance between them until Alina could feel the heat emanating from his drenched body. He was a wall of muscle and determination, a physical barrier between her and the fear that had haunted her since she left her old life behind. "As long as I'm here, they're my problem, not yours," he stated, and there was an implicit promise in that sentence that went far beyond professional duty. He reached out, hesitating for a second before lightly touching her shoulder, a gesture of comfort that seemed to burn through the fabric of her apron. Elena's vulnerability was almost palpable, an open wound that Silas seemed determined to protect. She looked at his hands, large and calloused, hands that had known how to wield a weapon, but which now treated the moment with unexpected delicacy. The external danger remained outside, translated into the glare of the headlights that still cut through the darkness, but within those four walls, under the cold light of the clinic, something new was being forged. The bond that was being born there was not made of sweet words, but of survival. Silas looked again at the dog, and then at the small titanium capsule that Alina had not yet dared to open. He knew what it represented. He knew that, by crossing that door to protect her, he was saying goodbye to the peace that Willow Creek used to offer. But, looking at the trembling and courageous woman before him, the sheriff realized that there was no other place in the world he would rather be. The secret the animal carried was the key to something dark, and from now on, the silence of the night would be his only ally. Alina sought his gaze once more, searching for an answer he couldn't yet give, feeling that each passing second brought them closer in a way that the danger only made more real and urgent. From that moment on, everything began to silently change, as the weight of Elena's silence finally met the weight of Silas's presence. She watched the trail of water running down his clothes, feeling that each drop that fell to the clinic floor was a second less of a piece she had fought so hard to build. Her journey to that small town forgotten by the map had not been a choice based on natural beauty or opportunities, but a silent cry for emotional survival. In her past, in a large and noisy city, Elena's voice had been systematically silenced. She had been the woman no one listened to, whose opinions were buried by larger egos, and whose pain was treated as mere background noise. Therefore, when she leaned over that wounded Belgian shepherd, the emotional impact did not come only from veterinary technique. As she cleaned the blood and stitched the torn tissues, she was, in her mind, trying to mend the very parts that the world had tried to destroy. Ignoring that animal, or handing it over to the men waiting outside, would be tantamount to accepting once again the idea that someone's pain can be disposable. Silas seemed to read this hidden truth in her eyes, an understanding that transcended the badge he wore on his chest. He saw that Elena was not just a dedicated professional, but a woman whose isolation was a shield, and who now, through an act of pure empathy, had lowered her guard. The atmosphere in the clinic grew thick, heavy with the decisions they both had to make in the next few minutes. Silas took a step toward the window, keeping himself at an angle where he could observe the street without becoming an obvious target. He knew the inner workings of that area. He knew that the calm of Willow Creek was often a facade for interests that lurked beneath the surface. As cold and relentless as the relentless rain, he glanced at Elena, noticing how she held the surgical forceps with a firmness that contrasted with the slight tremor in her lips. A transformation was taking place there. The woman who had fled the conflict was now at the epicenter of one. Silas felt a pang of something that hadn't visited his chest in a long time, a need for protection that wasn't bureaucratic, but visceral. He wasn't there just to uphold the law. He was there because he recognized in Elena a light that the men in the dark car wanted to extinguish. The clinic lights flickered again, and for a brief second, total darkness enveloped the three of them, the woman, the lawman, and the dog guarding a dangerous secret. In that momentary gloom, the sound of Silas's breathing was the only thing keeping Elena anchored to reality. When the power returned, she realized he had moved, positioning himself directly between her and the main door, a human wall of flesh, bone, and determination. He didn't need words to tell her that no one would get past him. This silent protection had an overwhelming effect on Elena. It was the first time in her adult life that someone had put themselves in danger for her, without question, without demanding anything in return, simply because they understood she was worth the risk. The fear that had previously paralyzed her began to give way to a fragile, but real, trust. She knew that the revelations to come could destroy the quiet life she loved so much. But looking at the sheriff's broad back, she felt that perhaps the safety she had sought wasn't in a geographical place, but in the courage of those who choose to stay when everyone else decides to leave. Silas then turned to her, his face hardened by experience, but with a glint of understanding that softened his authority. He knew that what was at stake that night was more than the life of an animal or the integrity of a titanium capsule. It was Elena's chance to finally be heard and protected, and he was willing to weather any storm to ensure that, this time, her silence wouldn't be the end of the story. Comment below. This makes sense to me. This is where the story begins to show what's really at stake, when Silas's silence, which until then seemed merely an extension of the storm, begins to reveal the scars he carries beneath the leather of his service coat. He wasn't there by chance. Fate has a perverse way of placing us face to face with our ghosts, precisely when we decide we no longer want to look back. For the sheriff, that Belgian shepherd on Elena's table wasn't just a wounded animal or evidence of a crime. It was the last physical connection to the greatest failure of his life. That dog had been the partner of his younger brother, a K-9 unit officer who had fallen in a botched operation. Months before, Silas had never forgiven himself for encouraging his brother to follow in his footsteps in the police force, and seeing the animal bleeding in Elena's hands was like reliving, in slow motion, the funeral he tried to forget every day. In the depths of his mind, guilt was a constant noise, a frequency he tried to drown out with work and isolation, but the image of that fragile yet determined woman, fighting to save what remained of her brother's legacy, provoked a profound transformation within him. He watched her with an intensity bordering on painful, noticing how she refused to give up, even when her hands trembled. Silas saw in Elena a purity he believed had been extinguished from the world. And the hidden truth he kept was that he was no longer just protecting a witness or an animal. He was protecting the only thing that still made his heart feel something beyond remorse. Their journey was intertwining in a way that logic could not explain, where the decisions of a man who swore to serve the law were now dictated by a much older and more primal instinct of zeal. As these thoughts cut through Silas's mind like the wind cut through the night, the atmosphere inside the clinic suddenly grew colder. The impact of the outside reality finally shattered the protective bubble they had created. The sound of heavy footsteps crunching on the soaked gravel of the parking lot echoed outside, and the car that had previously been just a distant shadow was now parked a few meters from the door. Two men got out of the vehicle, and they didn't look like ordinary street criminals. They wore dark overcoats and had the calculated posture of those accustomed to operating in the shadows of power. Individuals whose hands were clean, but whose orders were lethal. When the clinic door opened, bringing with it a blast of icy air and the metallic smell of rain, the direct consequence of Elena's act of kindness manifested itself in all its brutality. They didn't enter shouting. The threat was subtle, whispered with the confidence of those who know they are in control of the situation. One of the men, with a gaze that seemed to strip Elena's soul bare, fixed his eyes on the animal on the table, and then on the titanium capsule she still held. The price for helping was being exacted in real time. "Doctor, some things in this world are too big for your small office," he said, his voice a soft and terrifying contrast to the thunder roaring in the sky. "Don't make the mistake of hurting yourself over an animal that's already dead, even if it's still breathing." Elena's vulnerability had never been so exposed. She was a woman who had fled oppression only to find herself at the center of a conspiracy that knew no mercy. The isolation of the clinic, once her sanctuary of peace, now revealed itself as a glass trap, where every light turned on was a signal of danger. However, before fear could consume Elena's breath, Silas's presence materialized. Absolutely. He didn't need to draw his weapon to change the temperature of the room. The simple movement of physically placing himself between her and the intruders was an act of silent warfare. The impact of his authority was palpable, an unshakable barrier that forced the men to take a step back. Silas knew this kind of game, the backstage of revelations where truth was a dangerous bargaining chip, and he knew that the decisions made there, under the flickering light of the fluorescent lamps, would dictate who would emerge alive that night. He glanced at Elena, a silent signal that, as long as he stood, the outside world would not touch her. The journey that had begun with a wounded animal was transforming into something far more personal and dangerous. Elena realized that her life would never be the same again. She had crossed an invisible line, and the man beside her was the only guide she had in that unknown territory of shadows and violence. The danger was no longer a future possibility, but a physical presence occupying the same space as them. The tension was so high that the air seemed difficult to breathe, and the hidden truth about what was really inside that titanium capsule began to weigh like lead in Elena's pocket. She looked at the sheriff, seeing the rigidity of his jaw and the determination in his gray eyes, and understood that his protection came at a cost she couldn't yet measure. He was willing to break the rules he had sworn to uphold, to ensure she wouldn't be crushed by the gears of a corrupt system. Silas's transformation, from a distant officer to a fierce guardian, was the only thing preventing Alina from crumbling in the face of imminent disaster. They were now bound by a pact of silence and blood, a connection that grew under the unbearable pressure of a seemingly endless night, where every choice was a step towards an abyss or a redemption neither expected to find in that forgotten corner of the world. The impact of the intruders. Words still echoed, but Silas's hand, now resting firmly on the counter, was the only verdict that mattered to her. From that point on, Willow Creek ceased to be just a quiet town and became the stage for a confrontation where revelations would be paid for with real sacrifices. Silas knew that the car parked outside was only the tip of the iceberg, and that men in overcoats represented forces that were not intimidated by a county sheriff's badge. Elena's vulnerability, though profound, was beginning to be covered by a layer of courage she didn't know she possessed, awakened by the absolute confidence emanating from the man beside her. They were surrounded, but they weren't alone. There was an invisible force in what they were building, a bond that strengthened with each glance exchanged amidst the chaos. The decisions Silas made now were no longer based on protocols, but on a visceral need to not let Elena's light be extinguished. He remembered his brother's journey, how the system had betrayed him, and swore to himself that history would not repeat itself. The impact of his presence was the only thing keeping the danger at bay, but he knew the relief was temporary. The hidden truth about the chip in the titanium capsule was the trigger for something that could set the entire region ablaze, and they were right in the center of the powder keg. Alina felt the electricity in the air, the sensation that time was running out, and that every second of protection Silas offered her was too precious a gift. She moved closer to him, not out of weakness, but out of an instinctive search for warmth amidst the icy situation. Their journey was only beginning, and the path ahead promised to be paved with impossible decisions and the constant risk of losing everything. But there, under the roof of the clinic that smelled of antiseptic and fear, the sheriff's massive presence was the only safe haven she longed to inhabit, a fortress of flesh and blood that refused to yield, no matter how strong the storm outside blew. The silence that followed the men's threat was laden with unspoken promises, a romance blossoming in the barren soil of danger, and a protection that would be carried to its ultimate consequences, forever transforming the lives of two strangers whom pain and duty had irrevocably united. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject because, behind the unflappable face and the cold metal badge that Sheriff Silas sports, lies a labyrinth of shadows that no one in Willow Creek has been able to map. As he stood like a sentinel in the relentless rain, watching the reflection of the lights from Elena's clinic, his mind wasn't focused solely on the immediate danger, but on the inner workings of a soul that considered itself permanently indebted to fate. To the world, Silas was law, order, and silence. To himself, he was the man who carried the unbearable weight of a hidden truth, the failure to protect his own blood. That dog on Elena's table, a Belgian Malinois, with an intelligent gaze and war scars, was no stranger to him. He was the canine partner of his late brother, Lucas, the last living fragment of a family that Silas watched disintegrate in an operation that went terribly wrong 2 years ago. Silas never accepted the official version of events. He knew that the system he swore to defend had fatal flaws, and seeing that wounded animal, bleeding exactly as his brother had bled, had an emotional impact that almost made him lose his stony composure. Silas's journey up to that very moment had been paved with silent grief and a search for redemption he never thought he would find. When he received the alert about a suspicious car circling Elena's clinic, something inside him, an instinct he had been trying to suppress for months, awoke with a deafening urgency. He watched her through the glass fogged by her breath and the heat of the office, and what he saw was not just a competent veterinarian, but a woman whose vulnerability was cloaked in a quiet, almost desperate courage. He noticed how Elena's hands, though trembling, did not falter as she extracted the lead from the animal's body. There was an immediate shift in his perception. Silas, who had always avoided personal connections so as not to have anything left to lose, felt that the decisions of his life now led him to a dead end, where he would have to choose between his duty and his instinct as a man. He could not fail her. He would not allow the same men who had extinguished his brother's light to touch the woman who now, unknowingly, held the life of her last family companion in her hands. Through the rain trickling down the brim of his hat, Silas saw the moment Alina discovered the secret in the collar. He saw the shock cross her face, and the fear that followed when she noticed the car parked across the street. In that instant, Silas had already made his decisions. Before she even knew his name, before she could ask for help, he had already made her his absolute priority. The impact of that choice vibrated in his chest, like the engine of his patrol car. He knew that by entering that clinic and placing himself between her and the mercenaries guarding her, he would be declaring a war that could not be won with reports or warrants. He was plunging into a visceral journey of protection, where the revelations contained in that titanium chip would only be the beginning of a descent into hell. Silas saw in Alina a purity that needed to be preserved at all costs, a stark contrast to the rot he saw daily behind the scenes of local power. She was his chance to finally save someone who truly mattered, to rewrite the tragic ending that still haunted him during his sleepless nights. As he walked toward the clinic door, smelling the scent of wet asphalt and gunpowder that seemed ingrained in his memories, Silas watched the men in the black car make their movements. He knew they were professionals, that the hidden truth the dog carried was too valuable for them to give up, just for a county sheriff's badge. But Silas also knew something they didn't. A man who has nothing left to lose but the honor of his last promise is the most dangerous opponent there is. He saw Alina look at him through the glass, searching for an anchor in the storm. And the look he returned, though stern, carried a silent promise that the whole world could crumble around them, but he would be the fortress that kept her standing. The weight of Silas's past, marked by wrong decisions and painful losses, was finally being transformed into a clear purpose. He wasn't just there as the sheriff of Willow Creek. He was there as Elena's shield. The tension inside the clinic increased when Silas entered, his physical presence occupying every inch of the space, forcing the air to become denser and more electrifying. He saw the titanium capsule in her hand and felt the danger closing in like an invisible hand around both their necks. The revelations to come would irreversibly change the trajectory of that journey, but deep down, Silas felt a strange calm, a peace that only comes when you finally accept your destiny. He looked at the dog, then at Alina, and in her he found a motivation he hadn't felt in years. The impact of her gaze on him was like a lightning bolt illuminating the dark corners of his soul, revealing that perhaps the protection he offered her was the only thing capable of protecting him from his own remorse. Events of that night were being written with blood and courage, and Silas was ready to be the author of the next chapter, whatever the cost. He was no longer just a spectator of Elena's pain. He was the protagonist of her own safety. A man who discovered that his true authority didn't come from his badge, but from his ability to become the wall that evil could never break down. From that night on, Willow Creek would no longer be the place where they hid from the world, but the place where they would face the truth, side by side, while danger roared outside, and the protection of a broken but determined man became the only real refuge for a woman who would finally be heard. Write in the comments, I understand that pain. This is where the story begins to show what's really at stake. When the sound of tires cutting through the accumulated water on the asphalt ceases to be background noise and becomes the funeral march of Elena's tranquility, the vehicle, which was previously just a static shadow on the other side of the street, awakens like a predator that has finally decided the wait is over. The headlights remain off, but the movement is deliberate, slow, and laden with an intention that makes the air inside the clinic suddenly seem scarce. Alina watches, her fingers still stained with the Belgian shepherd's blood, as the car crosses the road and parks directly in front of her glass door, blocking any obvious escape route. The fluorescent light of the office, which she always considered a haven of healing, now transforms into a cruel reflector that exposes her to the outside world, turning her sanctuary into a showcase of vulnerability. Two men get out of the car. They don't wear masks, and that, in itself, is the most terrifying detail. They aren't afraid of being recognized because they don't plan to leave any witnesses capable of speaking. Their posture isn't that of common criminals driven by desperation. There's a military discipline in the way they close doors, a coordinated rhythm in their steps that suggests they're there to execute a technical task. A behind-the-scenes cleanup where human lives are merely variables in a power equation. Their entrance into the clinic is like a sudden drop in blood pressure. The bell above the door rings once, a cheerful sound that contrasts violently with the cold that pervades the room. They bring with them the smell of acid rain and a somber authority that makes the hairs on Elena's arm stand on end. She takes a step back, bumping into the stainless steel table where the dog still struggles to breathe, and feels the cold metal against her back. That's the limit. She has nowhere else to go. The first man, whose eyes are devoid of any glimmer of empathy, fixes his gaze on the animal, and then on the small titanium capsule that Elena, in an act of pure reflex, had hidden in her apron pocket. Their request is not a request. It is a dry demand, devoid of emotion. They want the animal. They want the hidden truth that the dog carries in its guts and on its collar. When Elena hesitates, feeling the weight of that life under her responsibility, the professional courtesy that the men initially feigned vanishes like smoke in the wind. The threat ceases to be subtext and becomes a sharp blade. "Doctor, some things are too big for your office," says the taller man, his voice a chilling whisper cutting through the silence. "Don't hurt yourself over an animal that isn't even yours. Charity has its limits, and yours ends at this door." At that moment, the isolation of the clinic reveals itself as a glass trap. Elena looks out the large windows and realizes that although she can see the rain and the trees of Willow Creek, she is completely alone on the stage of that confrontation. Or so she thought. The journey of decisions that brought her here seems to converge on a breaking point where her old identity, the woman who kept quiet and ran away, must die so that something new can be born. Fear is a paralyzing force. She feels her heart pounding against her ribs, a dull beat that seems to echo off the sterile walls. The transformation of her fear into resistance begins the moment she feels Silas's presence moving behind her. He hasn't said a word yet, but his shadow looms over the operating table, merging with hers. Silas is the variable those men didn't calculate correctly. To the invaders, he's just a small-town sheriff. To Elena, he's the only wall preventing the darkness outside from consuming her entirely. The revelations about who those men are and what they represent behind the scenes of a much larger conspiracy begin to take shape in Elena's mind. She understands that saving that dog was not just a medical act, but a political and moral stance. If she hands over the animal, she will be handing over the last piece of honor Silas still possesses. The impact of this realization makes her straighten her shoulders. She will not give in. Silas's internal conflict, in turn, reaches its peak. He observes the two men, recognizing in them the kind of ruthless efficiency that took his brother's life. He knows that the journey they are now embarking on will be irreversible. If he draws his weapon, the silence of Willow Creek will be broken forever. But looking at Elena, at the way she protects the dog with her own body, he understands that his mission of protection is no longer about the past, but about the present he needs to secure. The hidden truth about the titanium capsule is the fuel, but the love that begins to blossom amidst the danger is what truly sustains his determination. The men take another step forward, and the tension in the room becomes physical, like a rope being stretched to its breaking point. Elena feels the cold threat of "don't get hurt by a bug" vibrate in her ears. But she meets Silas's gaze reflected in the glass. In the gray of those eyes, she sees not only authority, she sees a promise that he would rather see the clinic burn than allow anyone to touch a hair on her head. The external danger now has faces and names, but the protection that surrounds her is made of a substance far more resistant than any armor. The clinic may be a glass trap for the predator's eyes, but for Silas, it is the ground where he will plant his flag of redemption. Each second of silence before the inevitable explosion is laden with silent revelations about what they mean to each other. Alina discovers that, for the first time in her life, she doesn't want to run from the conflict. She wants to stay and fight, as long as it's by his side. The journey of difficult decisions is only beginning, and the impact of what happens next will echo far beyond those walls. They are bound by an act of kindness that has become a target, and now, the only way out is through fire. Silas adjusts his utility belt, a subtle movement that makes the invaders stop. He is the sheriff, he is the shield, and he is the man who decided that Alina is his world. From this point on, there is no more room for doubt, only for the stark truth that some bonds are forged the moment danger decides to test us. The isolation of Willow Creek is now their battlefield, and protecting Silas is the only law that still matters. What seemed simple begins to reveal unexpected layers when the glass door of the clinic, which Alina believed to be her last line of defense, opens not with a bang, but with the precision of someone who knows every hinge and every crack in that city. Silas enters, and his presence doesn't bring the deafening noise of sirens or the blinding light of gyroscopes. He brings only the heavy silence of someone who dominates the terrain and the icy authority of a man who has seen the worst of humanity and survived to tell the tale. Rainwater trickles from his hat in a rhythmic cadence, but his eyes, fixed on the two men in overcoats, are like blades of steel heated in a forge of justice. He doesn't need to shout to be heard. The impact of his steps on the ceramic floor is enough to make the intruders recalculate the risk of their journey inside. When Silas stops between Alina and the men, the transformation atmosphere is one of absolute control. He's no longer just patrolling. He's marking territory. The men, who once acted with almost corporate confidence, now feel the weight of the badge he carries, but above all, they feel the contained ferocity of a man who has decided there is no more room for compromise. Silas looks at the group's leader, and his voice emerges from somewhere deep and weary, yet unwavering, saying that their jurisdiction ended the moment they decided to cross the county line in a storm. He doesn't ask them to leave. He opens a vacuum of authority that physically pushes them out. A silent expulsion where the threat of violence is a latent promise in every fiber of their tense muscles. As the men retreat and the sound of car doors closing echoes outside, the clinic plunges into a different kind of tension, one that is more intimate, denser, and charged with an electricity that Alina can barely process. Silas doesn't immediately turn to her. He watches the vehicle drive away into the curtain of rain, his hands resting on the utility belt, his shoulders still stiff. The isolation of Willow Creek now feels more real than ever, but no longer like a prison, but rather like a battlefield, where decisions, the shadows finally begin to surface. When he finally turns to Alina, hardness in his face softens just a millimeter, enough for her to see the man behind the sheriff. Alina is trembling, clutching the titanium capsule as if it were a grenade about to explode. And the impact of Silas's gaze on her is like an embrace of iron and velvet. He approaches the operating table, observing the dog that is breathing with difficulty. And it is at this moment that revelations, they begin to tear away the veil of normalcy she tried so hard to preserve. Silas places a heavy hand on the stainless steel counter and confesses, in a whisper that seems to carry the weight of mountains, that this animal is not just a victim of a common crime. He reveals that the dog, a veteran of the K9 unit, is the only physical evidence of a systemic corruption scheme that rots the backstage from the police of the neighboring city, a group that Silas's own brother was investigating before being silenced forever. From that moment on, Alina understands that danger is not something she can operate on and extract with a scalpel. She didn't just save an animal on that table. She inadvertently became its guardian. Hidden truths that powerful people spent fortunes to bury. The small capsule in his hands contains the records, voices, and evidence of a betrayal that reaches the highest spheres of regional authority. This discovery makes the world around her spin. Silas explains that the men who were there weren't just henchmen, but enforcers of a system that doesn't tolerate loose ends, and Alina is now the biggest loose end of all. She looks at the sheriff and sees the death pain he endured to get there, the guilt he carries for not protecting his brother, and the almost suicidal determination to ensure that, this time, the ending is different. The bond between them, born from the need for survival, begins to transform into something deeper, a romance forged in the heat of urgency and the cold of conspiracy. Silas doesn't offer her promises of easy safety. He offers the stark truth that, from now on, her life is intrinsically linked to his, and that the path to justice will be paved with brutal decisions and the constant risk of losing everything. Elena's vulnerability, which she had always seen as a weakness to be hidden, becomes Silas's anchor. He sees in her the innocence the system tried to corrupt, and the strength he thought he had lost. As the rain continues to lash against the glass windows, turning the clinic into an isolated fortress, they share a moment of absolute clarity. There is nowhere left to run. Willow Creek is no longer their refuge, but the epicenter of a storm that threatens to engulf everything they know. Silas steps forward, closing the space between them until Alina can feel the warmth emanating from his body. A vibrant contrast to the cold of the night. He lightly touches her hand, the one still holding the capsule, and the electric contact makes her heart leap. "They'll be back, Alina," he says, and the gravity in his voice is a constant reminder of what's at stake. "And when they return, they won't come to talk. But to get to you or that dog, they'll have to go through me. And I guarantee that no one on this earth is prepared for what I'm going to do to keep you alive." This declaration of visceral protection echoes off the sterile walls, bringing a mixture of terror and intoxicating relief. Alina realizes that her to anonymity ended, but in its place, something much more powerful was born, the chance to fight for something real, alongside a man who values her more than life itself. Revelations that night changed the course of their destinies forever, and the hidden truth, now it is the fire that warms them against the cold of betrayal. They look together at the animal on the table, the living symbol of a justice that still breathes, and understand that the coming hours will demand a transformation. Neither of them imagined they were capable of achieving it. Silas steps away to check the locks, but his gaze never leaves Alina for long, as if he were constantly reaffirming his silent promise. The danger outside continues to lurk, hidden in the darkness of the forest and the silence of the cars with their headlights off, but within those four walls, under the flickering light of the lamps, a new law is being written, the law of a man who has decided that love and duty are, finally, the same thing. The impact of every word spoken that dawn will be felt for a long time, and while the titanium capsule rests in Elena's pocket, the weight of the secret becomes the compass that will guide her next steps towards the unknown, where every decision could be her last, but where Silas's protection is the only constant in a world that has decided to become her enemy. He comments, "I saw that truth too." What seemed simple began to reveal unexpected layers as the silence in Elena's clinic grew as heavy as the ozone-laden air of the storm that still battered the glass windows. Silas looked at her, and for a moment, the silver badge on his chest seemed to weigh a ton, a symbol of an order he watched crumble before his eyes amidst the corruption he knew so well. The dilemma now consuming him was not merely technical or strategic. It was a crossroads of decisions, the moral lessons that would define not only the future of his career, but the survival of the woman who, in a few hours of chaos and bloodshed, had become the center of his gravity. Silas knew exactly how the system worked. He knew the backstage in the dark corners of the neighboring city's central police station. He knew that the walls there had ears sold to organized crime, and that justice was often a charade staged by men he called colleagues. Impact. This realization was devastating. Official protocol required him to take her to a protective cell or an interrogation room. But Silas understood that doing so would be tantamount to signing her death warrant. Taking Alina to the official channel would be handing her over on a silver platter to the infiltrated rats, the same ones who had facilitated the ambush that took his brother's life years ago. A hidden truth, the very law by which he had sworn to sacrifice his own life, was now the very instrument of the danger that threatened it. Silas felt the weight of his day as an officer being tested to the breaking point. Silas followed the playbook, maintaining a clean record and intact authority, but the price of such conformity would be Elena's body, languishing in some morgue before dawn. On the other hand, there was the alternative that haunted him with the promise of isolation and absolute risk, hiding her in his private cabin, a wooden and stone refuge hidden in the heart of the dense forest surrounding Willow Creek. By taking this path, Silas would be tearing up the code of conduct, acting outside any legal jurisdiction, and putting his career on an irremediable collision course with internal affairs. He would, technically, be kidnapping a witness and concealing evidence of a federal crime. Transformation, the transition from a lawman to an outlaw protector, was an abyss he hesitated to cross. But watching Alina wipe her trembling hands, seeking in him a safety she had never known in her life, Silas's inner conflict found its resolution in the pain of his memories. He couldn't fail her as he had failed his own flesh and blood. The atmosphere inside the car, as they left the clinic behind, was one of almost physical tension. Alina didn't ask where they were going. She simply watched Silas's hardened profile against the intermittent lightning, feeling that each of his choices was an anchor preventing her from being swept away by the current of fear. Revelations, what he would have to do about the rottenness of the system, would be the next painful step. But for now, his focus was on the dirt road that was beginning to turn into a dangerous quagmire. Silas didn't take the main highway leading to the center. He turned the steering wheel with visceral firmness toward the trail that disappeared under the shadow of the ancient trees. At that moment, Sheriff Silas ceased to be just a title and became the man who would be the only barrier between Alina and total destruction. He knew that, by crossing the boundary of his private property with her and the injured dog, he was abandoning the safety of his position to enter a territory where only instinct and loyalty mattered. Alina noticed the change in the route, saw the asphalt give way to stones and branches that banged against the metal of the car, and understood that the man beside her was sacrificing everything he had built to give her a chance to breathe. The silence between them wasn't one of distrust, but of a mutual understanding of the weight of what was at stake. Silas gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white, processing the fact that, from that moment on, he was a target just as much as she was. His thoughts constantly returned to backstage heat, imagined the messages being exchanged between the men in overcoats and their superiors, the tracking that would soon begin, and the pressure that would fall on his shoulders as soon as they noticed that the sheriff and the veterinarian had disappeared. But the image of Alina, vulnerable and yet so resilient, erased any trace of regret from his mind. The bond growing between them was forged in the need for survival, a silent romance that didn't need sweet words because it manifested itself in every defensive maneuver and every watchful glance he cast in his rearview mirror. Alina, in turn, felt that her Aundahar escape and silence were finally finding purpose. She was no longer just running from an oppressive past. She was fighting for a future alongside someone who truly saw her, someone who was willing to break the world to keep her whole. The cabin emerged from the fog like a protective shadow, a place where Silas kept his pain and loneliness, and which would now become their fortress. As he turned off the engine, the sound of rain on the roof of the vehicle was the only soundtrack to a moment fraught with uncertainty. Silas turned to it, and the dim light from the dashboard illuminated the scars of exhaustion on his face, but also the flame of determination that would not be extinguished. He knew the next few hours would bring more revelations. He knew the area was dangerous, and that the rats wouldn't take long to sniff out the path there. But as the mountain air filled his lungs, he felt he had made the only decision his honor allowed. He had chosen to be the man first and the sheriff later. The repercussions of that choice would echo throughout Willow Creek, but in the heat of that isolated cabin, the only thing that mattered was that Alina was safe, and that he would be there, standing at the door, ready to face any army that tried to cross his path. Hidden truth, the fact that the danger now came from those she was supposed to protect, was a burden he would bear with pride, as long as he could see calm returning to her eyes. Transformation, the full chapter of his life, was just beginning, and each step taken on that damp earth was an affirmation that justice sometimes needs to be done, far from courts and police stations. In the silence of the woods, and in the warmth of a commitment that knows no limits, Silas looked at the small titanium capsule in Elena's pocket, and then at her, feeling that, regardless of what happened at dawn, that night would belong only to them, and to the courage to choose each other against the rest of the world. What seemed simple began to reveal unexpected layers when the cabin door closed, isolating Alina and Silas in a dim light charged with electricity and silence, where the fury of the storm outside became just a muffled noise against the solidity of the wooden logs. In that confined space, the smell of resin, rain, and pine mingled with the metallic aroma of the antiseptic Alina still used to clean the animal's wounds. There were no artificial lights or the cold authority of a police station here. Only the flickering flame of a kerosene lamp that cast long, dramatic shadows across the walls, causing the rigid barrier between the lawman and the civilian to silently crumble. Silas was no longer the iron figure who dominated the streets of Willow Creek with a single gaze. He was just a man whose eyes reflected a pain that no service medal could hide. Elena watched how his large hands, accustomed to the weight of steel and the rigidity of duty, moved with an almost reverent delicacy as they helped her support the Belgian shepherd's body while she changed its bandages. There was a transformation in the air. The power dynamic that had defined the initial encounter was replaced by a raw complicity, forged in the heat of mutual need and the recognition of wounds that did not bleed. Each gesture shared that night was a piece of a journey neither of them had planned to take, but one that now bound them irrevocably. Alina felt the impact with each accidental touch of her fingers against Silas's warm, rough skin as they applied the gauze, a sensation that triggered sparks of a new and unsettling awareness she tried to ignore. She realized he hadn't brought her to that refuge simply to protect a witness or to fulfill a security protocol. Backstage, beneath his silence and vigilant demeanor, lay a visceral need for redemption, a desperate desire to save that life, and Elena's a way to silence the ghosts of a past he had revealed at the clinic. Hidden truth, the grief over the loss of her brother was there, present in every line of weariness on her face, and in each of her decisions, the risks he had taken to keep her out of reach of the corrupt system they both now faced. For the first time in her life, marked by planned escapes and the constant fear of being overheard, Alina didn't feel the urge to run into the shadows. The danger out there was real, palpable, and possibly climbing the mountainside at that very moment. But the security Silas emanated was a physical strength, a shield of flesh and blood that enveloped her in such a way that the outside world seemed a distant illusion. As revelations, the answers didn't come in grand speeches or dramatic confessions, but in the way he checked the door lock with one hand while the other rested, for a brief second, on her shoulder, assuring her that she was still there, that she was still safe. Silas struggled with his own internal conflicts, questioning the legality of his choices. But looking at Alina under the amber light of the cabin, he knew there was no other possible path for a man of honor. The bond that was born under that unbearable pressure was devoid of any idealized romance or cliches of flowers and dinners. It was a bond forged in survival, in glances that said, "I won't let you fall," and in a trust that was rebuilt with each measured breath of the dog that now rested. Alina saw in Silas not only the protector imposed by fate, but the only safe haven she had truly desired in her entire life. She saw the weight of the responsibilities he had sacrificed for her, and the impact this, in her own perception, was overwhelming. She was ceasing to be the woman who hid, and becoming the woman who chose to stay and face the storm. Not only for the truth contained in the titanium capsule, but for the man who had decided that she was his one and only absolute priority. The atmosphere in the cabin became a sanctuary against the chaos, a place where time seemed to have stopped, to allow two souls marked by injustice to recognize each other amidst the wreckage. The sound of the rain hitting the roof served as a hypnotic soundtrack to a moment charged with uncertainty, but also with an undeniable connection. Silas, sitting on the floor beside her after they finished the medical procedure, finally allowed his shoulders to relax. Though his eyes remained fixed on the window overlooking the darkness of the woods, day theirs was only just beginning. And the decisions they would have to make at dawn would certainly exact a price neither of them could foresee. But in that brief moment of peace under pressure, transformation, the emotional aspect, was a fait accompli. They were now two fugitives from their own histories, united by a hidden truth thought the world wanted to erase, and by a feeling born in the barren soil of risk. Silas reached out and, in a gesture of courage that surpassed any armed confrontation, touched Elena's face, wiping away a mark of weariness with his thumb. The silence that followed was filled with the implicit promise that, whatever the cost, he would be the wall between her and destruction. The world outside might be in flames and surrounded by traitors, but inside, in the dim light of the cabin, the security of a man seeking redemption was the only law that still made sense to Elena's heart. Comment below. This makes sense to me. From that moment on, everything began to silently change as the first gray light of dawn filtered through the cracks in the wooden planks of the cabin, bringing with it not the hope of a new day, but the icy sensation of a seemingly manufactured calm. The sound of the torrential rain, which during the night had served as a curtain of isolation, had now transformed into a persistent, silent mist rising from the forest floor, enveloping refuge in an embrace of uncertainty. Elena, seated in a worn leather armchair near the fireplace, whose embers still struggled to survive, watched Silas's profile against the window. He was motionless, a silhouette of authority and fatigue, maintaining a vigilance that transcended physical exhaustion. The police frequency radio, resting on a corner table, crackled with a harsh static before a distorted voice brought the news that should have brought relief. The suspicious vehicles had been seen, crossing the county line, retreating to the limits of the neighboring city. For Elena, the impact's words were like the air finally returning to her lungs after hours of suffocation. She felt her shoulders relax and a trembling sigh escape her lips. However, looking at Silas, she realized that transformation, the tension turned to peace, was a mirage that only she could see. She rose slowly, feeling every muscle in her body protest after the night of medical emergencies and visceral fear. Approaching him, Elena felt the need to break the distance imposed by duty and danger. She rested her head on Silas's broad shoulder, closing her eyes and allowing herself, for a single, fragile second, to believe that the world could be just again. In that contact, there was a silent surrender, an acknowledgement that hair to loneliness and escape had found an anchor point in the massive presence of that man. Silas allowed his eyes to close for a brief moment, absorbing Elena's warmth against his body, a vibrant contrast to the cold emanating from the window. But even in that instant of almost romantic closeness, the reality of backstage that conspiracy wouldn't leave him. While his arm protectively wrapped around Elena, his right hand remained firmly closed on the handle of the gun in its holster. For him, that relief was incomplete and dangerous. Silas knew the enemy they faced. He knew that retreat wasn't surrender, but a tactical move. In the dark corridors of power, where, hidden, truth the corruption scheme was protected by unscrupulous men, and a truce was merely the time the enemy needed to regroup and find a more effective way to attack. Silas's mind was working at a frantic pace, processing the decisions would have to be made in the next few hours of false calm. He knew that Alina and the dog's presence in that cabin was a secret with an expiration date. Revelations the weapons contained in the titanium capsule, which now rested on the table beside the bloodied gauze, were potent enough to destroy careers and topple local empires, and he had no illusions that they would be left in peace. His internal conflict intensified. How could he uphold the integrity of his promise of protection without turning that cabin into a tomb for both of them? Alina, feeling the unbreakable rigidity in Silas's muscles, looked up to meet his gaze. In the deep gray of those eyes, she saw not the celebration of the men's retreat, but the confirmation that the war was only beginning. The relief she had felt moments before began to dissipate, replaced by a sober understanding that the security he emanated was the only real thing in a world of shadows and betrayal. She realized that his transformation from sheriff to personal guardian was complete. He was no longer acting by code or law, but by a visceral loyalty that both frightened and fascinated her. As the daylight intensified, revealing the mud and struggle marks on the cabin floor, the stillness of the forest seemed laden with secrets. Every crack of a branch outside, every movement of a bird, was filtered through Silas's heightened senses. He knew that the emotional impact of that night had changed something between them, creating a bond that no ordinary situation could have forged. They were no longer just two strangers brought together by chance. Now they were two fugitives from a broken system, sharing a journey of absolute risk. Silas looked at the Belgian shepherd, now fast asleep, medicated, and then at Alina. He saw in her the same resilience he had seen in the animal, a strength that deserved to be preserved against the rot that surrounded them. Hidden truth: what they were protecting was the burden that bound them together, and Silas was willing to carry every ounce of that weight to ensure it wasn't crushed by him. He knew that, at midday, the retreat of the men in overcoats would be explained as a tracking error or a change of plans, but the threat would return, perhaps disguised as a legal warrant or an official visit from colleagues from the neighboring city. Silas's situation was becoming increasingly lonely and dangerous, distancing him from the life he knew and plunging him into a territory where only her survival mattered. Alina, for her part, began preparing a strong coffee in the cabin's small kitchen, the rhythmic sound of boiling water attempting to mimic a normalcy that no longer existed. She watched Silas check the reserve ammunition, a silent ritual that spoke volumes about the transience of that peace. The impact of those actions on her was profound. She had never been the center of anyone's attention in this way, never been the priority that justified the sacrifice of a career and a stable life. The romance blossoming between them needed no words. It was present in the way Silas's eyes followed her to every corner of the room, in the way he positioned himself between her and the door whenever he heard a different noise. It was a protection that enveloped her like a second skin. And although the external danger was a storm approaching again on the horizon, the warmth of that cabin and the unwavering presence of the man beside her made her feel, for the first time, capable of facing whatever came her way. Revelations: they had a few hours of peace, a small interval in time where they could just breathe and be themselves, but they both knew that the enemy was just waiting for the fog to dissipate to show its true face. Silas squeezed Elena's hand for a second before returning to his post at the window, a gesture that sealed the implicit pact that they would go to the end, whatever the cost, so that the truth would not be buried along with them in the silence of that forest. What seemed simple began to reveal unexpected layers when the silence of dawn in the cabin ceased to be a relief and became a silent countdown. Alina held the coffee cup in her hands, feeling the warmth of the porcelain. As the only point of balance in a world that had become unrecognizable in less than 24 hours, she watched Silas, standing by the door, with the vigil of someone who doesn't know rest, and realized that, transformation hers was complete. The man who had approached her at the clinic, with the coldness of an officer, now carried the weight of a Dathit. He had chosen to follow only her path. Impact the decision chick, he decided that morning, when he abandoned protocol and Thayback's doggy sound of his safe house in the police station to hide her in the woods echoed in every inch of that room. Silas wasn't just running from the law. He was rewriting the meaning of justice in a broken system. And the hidden truth contained within the small titanium capsule on the table was proof that the enemy was not only coming towards them, but that he had always been there, hiding behind badges and empty promises of security. Alina felt that her own life, marked by years of silence and submission, was undergoing a metamorphosis under the watchful eye of the sheriff. She had always been the woman who bowed her head before force, who fled to avoid conflict, but being there, in that isolated refuge, surrounded by Silas's unwavering protection, awakened in her a courage she didn't even know she possessed. Revelations. Silas's story about his brother and the neighboring town's conspiracy had ripped the veil from his innocence, but, paradoxically, had given him something to believe in. The bond that united them now was not just shared danger, but a deep, visceral connection born of pain and the need for redemption. She moved closer to him, noticing how the muscles in Silas's back tensed with every sound coming from the forest. A tension that never dissipated. Hidden truth, the truth was that, for Silas, Elena's safety had become his only religion. A purpose that redeemed him from all the losses he couldn't avoid in the past. Silas turned to her when he sensed her presence, and the gray of his eyes seemed to carry all the melancholy and strength of the mountains surrounding them. He saw the fear on Elena's face, but he also saw the determination, and that struck him with a compacted emotion he was trying, in vain, to suppress. He knew the calm outside was a trap, that the rats of the system were just waiting for the right moment to cross the trail. But seeing Alina there, so close, he understood that there was no decision chick he would regret if the goal was to keep her whole. Silas moved closer, and the space between them vanished, filled with the electricity of a romance that needed no words to be consummated. He placed one hand on her cheek, the contrast of her rough skin against the softness of Elena's face, a physical reminder that he was her shield against the brutality of the world. Transformation. His transformation from a solitary man into a devoted guardian was now the only law governing that cabin. It was then that Silas, his voice laden with a gravity that seemed to vibrate directly into Elena's bones, said what she needed to hear to finally stop running from within herself. He looked her in the eyes, ignoring for a second the crackling radio on the table and the danger lurking beneath the morning mist. Elena, you saved the only thing left of my family. Now, the whole world can try to come through that door, but no one touches you while I still have the breath to be your shield. The words fell like a verdict upon her heart, sealing a promise that went far beyond the duties of a sheriff or the obligation of a citizen. At that moment, Delina's time as a fugitive ended, giving way to a new reality where she was the center of someone's world. Impact. The shock of that declaration was overwhelming, a force that shattered the last defenses she still maintained. She realized that Silas's protection was not a burden or a debt, but a conscious choice by a man who had found in her the reason to continue fighting against the shadows of Backstagathat haunted him. As Silas turned his attention to the window, his hand once again resting on the gun's handle, Alina understood that the truce was, in fact, temporary. The sound of a distant engine, almost imperceptible to ordinary ears, put Silas's senses on high alert. The enemy was returning, perhaps stronger, perhaps with new strategies to bury the hidden truths they protected. But looking at the broad back of the man who had just sworn his own life for hers, Alina didn't feel the urge to flee into the woods. She felt a strange calm, a serenity that only exists in the eye of a hurricane, when you have absolute confidence in the foundation that sustains you. She approached the table, picked up the titanium capsule, and stored it firmly, ready to face their evolution shath the day would bring. a transformation their bond was complete. They were no longer just two strangers united by a wounded dog, but partners in a war that would demand everything from them. Silas glanced at her, a silent nod that he had heard the danger approaching, and Alina simply nodded, positioning herself behind him, not just as someone who needs protection, but as someone who understands that the strength of the shield depends on the will of the one being protected. Elena's escape cycle ended there, in the dim light of that cabin, replaced by AOF resilience and a romance that external danger only served to refine, making it as resilient as the titanium they carried. The day was just beginning, and the decision shows, shots taken in the silence of that morning, would be the fire that would test the strength of the bond that united them against the rot that was climbing the mountain. While the sound of tires on the gravel outside announces that time to breathe is over, we realize that stories like this aren't just about fear, but about the beauty of finding shelter amidst the chaos. If this journey of Silas and Alina, made of silence and visceral courage, made you feel something real, a like is a simple way to show me that this message crossed the screen and touched your heart. The Heart of Protection Stories exists precisely to be that refuge, where the stories that remain find those who truly need to hear them. If stories about choice, protection, and feelings resonate with you, subscribe to Heart of Protection Stories. It's a way for us to continue walking together through these shadows in search of light. I'd love to know which part of this connection resonated with you the most, or if you've ever felt this desire to be someone's shield. So write it in the comments. This protection made sense to me. And if you don't want this atmosphere of caution and risk to end now, there's a video over here that delves even deeper into this kind of impossible decision and surrender. Just click and follow along there.